Okay, welcome everyone to our session on digital and physical infrastructure, laying the foundations for a global AI revolution. So the ambitions are in check. We've got a fascinating panel, and I'm sure we're going to have a very full and rich conversation. We've got most panelists here in person, one panelist online. I'm going to introduce the panelists shortly. Let me just level set very quickly about some of what's happening on the infrastructure AI side, just to get a sense of the scale of what we are talking about today. So NVIDIA at least has made recent estimates that the build out in AI infrastructure by the end of the decade will be around $3 to $4 trillion. It's estimated that this year there was about $600 billion invested in AI infrastructure. And this really started with arguably a small Microsoft investment of about $1 billion into OpenAI in 2019. So just underscore how much this has grown and scaled in a very short period of time. And we're seeing this infrastructure investment happen globally. In the US, you've probably heard names like Hyperion and Prometheus and Stargate, just to give you a sense of the ambition and the imagination. In Europe, it's a little less sort of grandiose, but we were talking about AI factories and HPC and gigafactories and so forth. But also, this is not only happening in the US and Europe, it's happening in China. Recently, Google and Microsoft made announcements of investments into India. So this is increasingly a global phenomena. And it's not just about CPUs and GPUs, it's also increasingly about access to energy. According to the IEA, data centers globally made out around 1.5% of total electricity demand, but has grown at about 12% per annum in the last 5 years. And various estimates, again, by the IEA is that this could double, energy consumption could double by 2030. Some estimates are it will triple by 2035. So it really underscores that this is going to be, I think, a key component about the trajectory of AI infrastructure, data centers used for AI and so forth. And it really brings into the equation a whole conversation around energy supply, what energy we're using, transmission lines, connectivity, and so forth. In fact, the largest data centers that are being built are estimated to be going to be using around 500 megawatts, potentially up to 1 gigawatts per factory, right? So we're talking about extremely large investments and large energy consumption. And this is all, some of the questions I think we're going to get into in the panel is also how the sovereignty piece overlays it, like what's driving a lot of the policy to localize data centers, create that investment. And we heard a little on the first panel about different visions for AI sovereignty, so we'll talk more about what that means at the infrastructure level today. So let me now introduce the panel briefly, and then we'll jump into conversations. We're going to have a very kind of open, moderated, conversational approach to this to generate interest, and then we'll make some time at the end for audience Q&A, so please think about questions you might want to ask the panels. I'm just going to read through here the panelists, probably in reverse order from who you're seeing on stage, starting with Manuel Mateo Goyet, who's Head of Unit, Cloud and Software, Future Networks at DG Connect at the European Commission. Dr. Alexandra Guin-Petz, who's Director General for Technological Sovereignty and Innovation at the Federal Ministry of Research, Technology and Space in Germany. Pamela Krzypkowska, who is Director of Research and Innovation in the Ministry of Digital Affairs in Poland. Daniel Szczeczka, who is Acting Director General for Digitalization and Innovation at the Ministry of Industry and Trade in the Czech Republic. We have virtually Swadeep Singh, who is a General Manager of the Data Pillar for the India AI mission, and to my immediate right is Iveta Lochovska, who is Chief Technologist, AI, Data and Supercomputing at HPE. Welcome, everyone. So look, I just want to kick it off with a bit of a level-setting question around talking about cloud. We tend to aggregate it up to cloud, but it'd be, I think, good to break it out a little bit into public cloud, on-premise cloud, the role of high-performance computing in this space, and what it means for AI. So let me maybe turn to you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, let's see if this is working. Can you hear me well? I think it's good that we have a common taxonomy when we talk about AI and what you actually need to run and operate AI system or algorithms. And I'm a chief technologist and principal scientist within Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And I recognized yesterday at the dinner that many people didn't know what we do, but we do build the most powerful supercomputers that are mainly used to train and operate AI workloads. So coming from that perspective, and of being a person who is, my job is to write algorithms for living, we know that there are multiple ways in which you can run, operate, and make AI successful. So depending on the size of the algorithm, depending on the workload, depending on the scale you need. Do you need to reach an organization? Do you need to reach a country? Or do you need to reach a continent with this kind of workloads? There are different approaches that make sense more. So you could run something in the cloud, you can run on-prem, you can run hybrid, depends on do you bring the data where the algorithm is hosted, or do you follow laws like data gravity and you bring the algorithms as close as possible to the data gravity? And then hybrid or on-prem models are more suitable. And of course, supercomputing centers where sovereignty and research and innovation happens, especially on national level, as we work with most nation states to build those, then you have more arguments to have things on-prem and have the sovereignty certification around that. And additional point, I think in the previous panel, I really like the Danish guy, Nikolai, mentioning that is Chinese models and especially DeepSeek, they did break the math when it comes to what exactly you need to build successful AI models and to operate them in different environments. This is a proof that with very small, lean, niche resources and a lot of local talent, like we have in Europe, you can do a lot of things in hybrid on-prem models, and especially in those AI factories and gigafactories, which is now the quite unique thing in Europe, and I think quite successful. So,
great, thank you. I'm not sure if any other panelists want to come in on that question or elaborate on that. We're good? Good. Okay, so let's now move to this question of what we're seeing in terms of demand for computational power, going forward, and what do each of you see in terms of challenges, short-term, medium terms, in terms of kind of building the capacity domestically? You can talk globally as well in terms of meeting that demand. Yep, absolutely.
Hello, yeah, shall I start? First of all, thanks for having me, and I'm sorry that I cannot really look because the light is so strong on my face. So in terms of demand, it's quite interesting to see on several things. We always talk about demand for training models, but as soon as models are trained and you need it for the day-to-day business, the demand is very different. So demand in the area of research and innovation and transfer is very different, I believe, from the demand you have in the daily use when you're in the several different industries. In the context of preparing the AI gigafactory applications, talking for Germany, I can say we're talking to so many potential clients. Not only from the research area, I think we know quite well what they need because most of our capacities that we're supporting at the moment are in the research context. But for the industries, it's two things. One is there is not so much experience when you go to the smaller and middle-sized companies, so there is still a lot of translation and training to do. This is one thing. And the other thing is the data. We heard that on the panel before. So it's not only about capacities, but it's really the close connection to data centers. And also in the first step, collect data in a way that you can use it further. And there is still, I would say, a really long way to go. So it's a marathon, actually, to really build this ecosystem in a way that it's fruitful and and leads to more economic, sustainable growth. Yeah.
Great.
And the third thing, sorry, I forgot that, at least for the German sector, I can say the public demand. We know quite few about that. In Germany, we only have, since a couple of months, for the first time, a federal ministry for digitalization, for example. But we have it in place now, but their work is mainly now to see how can we be more efficient and do we need to translate and support with AI. And that also this is an assessment which we need to do and which will take a little bit of time and is also a data question. Yeah.
Yep, great.
Maybe what I can add from our perspective of Poland is that, first of all, what is important, of course, we talk about the AI factories and all of this element of usage of the compute power. But then there's a lot of as Alexander has mentioned, the lack of information, even on the side of business, how to really implement it. And what we really need to do is we cannot only give companies or even public sector, even more public sector, just give them compute and say, well, it's GPU per hour, go and use it. It's the process of actually giving them a full stack solution that they can really use easily, because the competencies and the understanding and the perspective of what they actually can do is going to, get bigger and higher, but still the competences need to be trained and need to be made on, actually developed. But also going further from what Iveta mentioned on the DeepSeek and about the smaller models, what I think is when we talk to, again, many ministries, as we have a digital ministry for some time, and we're trying to, put all the dots together, which sometimes is hard because different ministries have different experiences, they have different level of IT competences. So again, getting everyone on the same page sometimes take a lot of conversations. But what they say to us, the first question always, and this is the same with businesses, they say, oh, we want a chatbot. We want a chatbot. Why do you need a chatbot? Well, because everybody has a chatbot. And what actually we need to do is we need to dive deeper into the perspective of what they need, what they want. And again, if you want to run the biggest GPT on the market, the amount of the inference capacity is much different. Or if you want to use a local model, for example, we have created a local generative model. The smallest version for now have 7 billion parameters, and we have even a different one. We have 2 national models that have 3 billion parameters. So it's small for the perspective of the model. You can run it on a single card, and we're trying to do it because one of them is especially for the public administration. So the perspective of if you want to run on-prem, as Iveta has sort of showed that you can go hybrid. If you want to run on-prem, then there is a capacity for you not to buy, a big supercomputer. You can run it on a single card in the perspective of the AI factory or even on AI sandbox. But then it's the question of what do you really need? So I think that when we discuss capacity, when we discuss those gigafactories or AI factories, we says 20,000 GPUs, 100,000 GPUs. Well, how much do you actually need in the perspective of your workload? Because maybe you don't need a chatbot. You need a decision tree or smaller model that doesn't even need 1/10 or 100th of this capacity.
That's super helpful. Daniel, yeah.
Okay, yeah. If I may add from my perspective, maybe just from the global terms, first we have to understand what are the conditions of the global technological race. And the race is, as always, about people, data, and infrastructure / hardware / energy. And all these aspects play a crucial role when you want to build or enhance the competitiveness of an economy or certain area. And that for sure is linked to the cloud and AI technology as well. I would add that in our country, always try to tell the stakeholders, demystify first the AI hype and demystify it at the level of use cases, as was mentioned by the panelist. Because then again, you will come to what you really need. Sometimes the stakeholders realize they have not clear data sets or they have not made their exercise in the data first, and they want to skip this first stage and jump on the bandwagon of AI without having the preconditions at place. So sometimes it's like painful, but it pays off from our perspective, and be it in the public administration or in the private sector.
Great. Swati, I just want to bring you into the conversation to just ask you if you can lend a bit of a perspective on what's going on in India in terms of, I mean, I know there's a big push on digital public infrastructure, but more broadly, how India is thinking about what role it can play in the ecosystem and also the particular importance of expanding investments into the type of infrastructure we're talking about here to enable AI development.
Yeah, thank you very much for calling me in. So, if we take about the Indian perspective, we are in a motion to democratize the AI. With all the hype going on, with all the motion going on from uh, narrow AI, the journey which we are in terms of super intelligent AI, right into the journey of agentic AI, we are looking to expand the AI and democratize the AI. We have taken a very strategic directions by establishing these entire policies in 7 different pillars. I will talk about a couple of the relevant pillars. Like when you talk about mobilizing the AI, it's about the problems, it's about the solutions, and how is best with the solution. So we, through our application pillar, we look at the problems and the relevant solutions so that if there is an inferencing required, it is just the inferencing layer which needs to be built in. If it is the development requires, there are development layers to be built in, so on and so forth. But apart from that, just for the infrastructure, we are in a mass movement to create those India-specific models, given that the variety of languages, variety of needs which is there in India in terms of data is pretty huge. So what we have done is we have taken different approaches, like for training the models to develop those VLMs, LLMs, or SLMs. We have impaneled like large amount of GPUs. Like we in last year we were able to mobilize around 38,000 plus GPUs accessible for the public at a very subsidized rate at after subsidy, like at a rate which is less than $1 per hour, which is pretty competitive or maybe like better than the rates which are available across the globe, so that the people who wants to develop these models, they get access to it. But again, as we start talking about inferencing everything. That's a place where the investments are going on for the sovereign infrastructure, everything. We are developing large infrastructure both for AI for governance and also supporting the public, where big motions are going on for setting up one gigabyte byte storages, have a lot of those infrastructure built in and all those things. So we are making a static push in terms of looking at two sides. One is to support the inferencing, there is a different need. To support the training model development and everything, there's a different need. We have taken an approach where there's something where we are creating a sovereign infrastructures and which are dedicated infrastructure, which would be there for different use cases for data security and all those things. And then there are like a lot of imbalance, everything, so that people who need the infrastructure for large scale usage, everything, they get what they need. And again, on top of that, to enable more sovereignty, there is aspects of in-house chip development, everything, which we are running through another program, which is Semicon. So we are investing strategically in a lot of these programs by a lot of public investments and private investments as well. Like the entire AI mission, which is trying to mobilize these compute for AI ecosystem. That entire pillar runs more than 10,000 crore INR worth of investment, which has gone and which is in uh, upwards of $1 billion for just from the government side. The private players are equally investing to set this infrastructure to have the AI motion on. So that's the perspective which we are taking in, like having slightly different approach while the inferences are going on, and having slightly different approach when the trainings of those sovereign models are going on.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Manuel, I would like to bring you into the conversation. We've heard a bit about what's going on in Europe in terms of AI factories and gigafactories. I know that you're involved in the Cloud AI and Development Act. Maybe if you could just provide a bit of a sense of where the Commission's goals are in terms of developing more localized cloud capacity, what the next steps are with the cloud, where the Cloud AI development is at, what we expect to see come out of it, and so would be great.
Thank you very much. Maybe the best is to start from what the colleagues in the panel have said, to which I very much agree. It's indeed a problem of capacity. It's indeed a problem of international race. It's indeed a problem of energy. Today, Europe has broadly 12 gigawatts of data center capacity. But the demand is about 2 gigawatts higher. And there's two problems with that. The first one is that prices are going up, and capacity, the vacancy of this capacity is going down, logically. I mean, it's a simple supply and demand situation. The other problem, which I don't think was mentioned yet, is that this capacity is very much concentrated in Europe in a few places, which in itself is not a huge problem, right? You can provide cloud services, AI services 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away without a big problem. But what it highlights is an opportunity to go to other places where this capacity is not yet installed. And why so? It's because where we see huge concentration of capacity coincides with places where energy grids are over-constrained and have reached their limits. They are currently, they go with different names, but sort of moratorias in Ireland, in the region of Amsterdam, in the region of Frankfurt. I mean, those are the places, Paris as well, where energy constraints are so that this over-concentration has reached a point where it's too much, while other places in Europe have less constraints on this grid. The other problem is that this about 2 gigawatts of gap in computing capacity in between supply and demand is growing. It was a gigawatt a few years ago, and we haven't released yet the figures, but the preparatory study that we have conducted for the in view of the Cloud and AI Development Act shows that this gap is widening. And this is despite the industry moving from 12 to about 28 gigawatts by the end of the decade. So they're multiplying by 2.5 the capacity. And this is, I mean, usually figures in the future are a bit difficult to anticipate, but the construction time is so that at the end of the decade, figures are fairly reliable. And pushing the logic into 2035, 36, 10 years, that's our time perspective, this gap is growing bigger and so on. So now to answer really your question, what are we looking at? I think there's many angles through which this can be tackled, and I hope we won't leave any stone unturned. But in short, is to make the life easier of those who want to invest. Data center management, capacity management is a money-making business. It's not a sector you need to subsidize because it has some other problems. There's a particular case which is not about subsidizing, but it's about developing our own capacity. That's the one that was evoked in the context of high-performance computing, public research, and things like this. That's the AI gigafactories and the normal factories. But the private part doesn't need, the private part needs help, but not subsidies. And so the idea there is to make the life of investors much easier. About helping them identify sites rather than have investigators throughout Europe to find the right location. It's about facilitating them access to energy information. It's about facilitating the permitting procedures. It's about better coordination. So this is not common everywhere in Europe, but sometimes you have, in some countries, you have very complicated relations from an administrative permitting. I'm not saying there's disagreements, but in between national, regional, and local regulations, there's endless examples of everything is approved, but the local mayor wants a sponsor for his football team in exchange of signing the final thing. So this type of examples are plethora, and we want to make life really easier for those investors in Europe. And then on the tiny gritty question, we're heavily preparing the Cloud and AI Development Act, and this is something we're planning to adopt from a Commission point of view, of course, then to be negotiated with the Council and Parliament in Q1 next year, rather end of Q1 than the beginning of it.
Great. Iveta, let me turn to you, just picking up on the conversation here. How do you see the opportunities and challenges in terms of what the build out of gigafactories and AI factories will mean for where you sit in terms of meeting the types of gaps in the market that you are talking about, where it's not necessarily that the private sector needs to be subsidized, but we want more capacity for researchers, maybe for small businesses. How's this going to work, and what do you see as the path forward from where you sit?
Yeah, so our job is to work with all of the supercomputing centers from Sweden, Poland, for research, innovation with the AI factories, gigafactories, but also enterprises. Enterprises also build their own capacity, or service providers like telecom, and to provide AI as a service or GPU as a service. You know, Norway and France and Germany are doing the same. I see a couple of components. First, I think we need to triage the problem. Some regions have different strengths. For example, Norway and France have energy strengths. Eastern Europe has talent strengths, so the best scientists and the best researchers when it comes to mathematicians. If you Google the most powerful model right now that we all use on a daily basis, OpenAI, if you scratch the surface and open the papers of OpenAI, you would see that 80% of the leadership team of OpenAI is from Poland, and Pamela knows that. And they have been trained in Polish universities on the Polish supercomputers, but they have been shipped to the US to build models there. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Maybe Poland is doing great now, so I'm super impressed of how they're handling things. But working with the AI factories, with the gigafactories, it's a bit of giving confidence. I think most of the communities in Europe are very modest, and I work with the researchers. I teach at university myself in Vienna. I know that we have a modesty problem, but also one thing I would put more emphasis on is trying to make this whole exercise commercial, not just building science papers and publications and muscle. Yes, building computing muscle and the science muscle, but trying to make the whole exercise more competitive. And those are kind of the least common denominators I see when talking to, the KTH Sweden or in Poland, where they're training Plum and Bielek, I think, and so on, is that first we have great talent. There are regions of energy that we can try to play the cards and see how to utilize that, but also trying to be more competitive and more confident. And once you're given the muscle, in this case, if muscle is infrastructure and data, then you can be actually competitive globally, because we have the underlying conditions to do that. I think it's just realizing in what waters you're swimming in, who you're competing with, and what your strengths are. And I love the AI Factory and Gigafactory initiatives. I think they're suffering from their own success of really giving this confidence and visibility. And everyone, if you talk to universities, if you go to the different smaller pockets of people, either in Germany, Austria, Poland, everyone is asking about that. Means they have already achieved a momentum. Now we have to or deliver on that momentum.
Great, I like that. I want to pick up on this question of commercialization, but also I want to bring in the question of sovereignty, which has come up in the last panel. And I'd like to get the panel's reflections on, when you think about the stack, particularly the infrastructure layer, the CPUs, GPUs, and the data centers that will use them, how are you thinking about sovereignty from an EU perspective? What elements do you think are important to sort of emphasize and build on? What elements do you think may not be the most productive outcome if they're pushed too far?
I would say that, again, there are no easy questions in this discussion. There are only hard questions. But as I said before, we need to think about the whole stack. And usually when we talk about sovereignty on the basic level, we talk about software or we talk about data center. So we say, so the data center is on my soil. So in this case, on Polish soil. Or I created my own software, my model that I control, and so these are the two levels of sovereignty that we talk about. But this great idea that I really love about the Euro stack and the perspective of, well, where we have capacity on each levels of the stack starts with minerals, then goes to next level, so the chips, then goes to the next level of actually building the computers, then putting the computers somewhere, then software, then applications. So there's the whole stack that we need to think about. And I'm not saying that, we need to create everything on our own, because it doesn't work like that. We live in a global world, and we need to be aware that we do. But on the other hand, we need to think where we have those biggest liabilities or those biggest dependencies on different elements of that stack. And the Eurostack initiatives are doing a great job researching this, putting this up front. I would recommend everyone who hasn't already read their reports that they're putting out, and they're doing great work on the perspective of where do we are in different elements of the stack. But I'm very excited, and I actually really like the RISC-V initiative and everything that's going around the chips that are being created on open licenses, because we need to remember that a lot of the chips and hardware that is being created is licensed by particular companies and particular deployers, so that they own the license and they can only create the chips. But what Iveta said about the talent and about the energy that is in Europe, I think we have great potential to really keep this going if we do it together. So there's an element of cooperation, element of building on each other's talent and energy and things that we know. But also we need to remember that right now, anything that we have created is not on par on the level of we can buy on the market from non-European vendors. So I'm not saying, well, we can just, use our own everything. It's the perspective of we need to be able to choose. Sovereignty is about choice. It's not about everything needs to come from Europe, come from Poland. It's about I am able to choose which vendor from where, and in some cases, maybe I need a European vendor, software, hardware, or chips I'm able to use and work with.
Yep, great. Yep, that's good job.
No, thank you. Maybe I can add on that. It's true that sovereignty is not autarky, but I think we need to be able to manage the whole value chain and the whole stack, as you said. And I don't think we're really there yet, actually, if just one element within the stack doesn't work the way we were used to so far. And we see the issue with Nexperia, I think, in the last weeks and months. So I think it's about really thinking systematically, one thing, and then being able to manage it. And then from there on, having choices and maybe becoming more resilient. I think that's really, and it's a common task for all of us. So yeah, I would underline we need more cooperation on the European level, and there is a big chance you can only answer this on a European way, but at the same time, if you want commercialization and the companies, they need trust, and this is something that has a local component somehow, and there maybe the European Union can also be somehow a matchmaker or somebody who can give a seal or help with this trust issue. So yeah, we need a European level, but at the same time, don't forget the local level, because this is where companies are, where the mayors are, where the data is. And all of this is really the main hurdle I experience when I talk to smaller companies, is really that they don't trust where they put their data, in which cloud, where is that, and this is really a potential we have.
Yeah, and I want to bring both Daniel and Manuel into the conversation, but I just want to pick up on what I think may be similarities, but also differences in both the way you framed it. Because, Pamela, you sort of seem to reflect this notion of choice, which wasn't clear to me if that necessarily meant choice amongst only European suppliers, but it could be choice amongst European, non-European suppliers. Often it's going to be US, it might be Chinese, but if you have choice, you're not getting lock-in, and maybe that's what you're looking for. I heard from you a more a bit of more of a focus on trust, which suggested it's got to be more European than a range of not European and non-European vendors. And I'm not sure if I'm putting words into your mouth, but there seemed to be a little difference there. But maybe we can kind of pick up on some of that in the conversation when we think about what do we
It's a
mean.
way, yeah, it's not black and white, but it's a common path we have to go, yeah. And first having choice is the first step.
Yeah.
And be aware what it means to manage such a value chain. He started with minerals. I mean, they're from Europe. It's completely clear we are far away from being independent there. So that's why I think it's a common trajectory. Or how you say in English? Yeah.
Absolutely, Daniel, and then I'll turn to Manuel, and then we'll bring in Swadeep.
Yeah, I would pick up on the value chain approach, because in global terms, who is the winner? The one who controls the whole value chain. That's the ideal state. Can we make it in EU? Not at this moment. So it's from the perspective of the Czech Republic, we are pursuing the approach that the sovereignty should be taken, as we call it, in an open manner, not to look ourselves but at the same time to manage strategically our tech dependencies on the third countries. But that doesn't mean that we should not cooperate with like-minded third countries. That's the principle we are voicing for more than 1 year. But at the same time, there should be some exemptions, because, for example, for the critical digital infrastructure of a state, you have to be more cautious than in the commercial applications of cloud and AI, and that's, let's say, taken for granted that there should be a different regime, and then we come to the solutions possible, and that's the debate we are also waiting with the Cloud and AI Development Act, how to approach these two, let's say, branches of cloud and AI and data center ownership and so on.
Manuel, when you framed your response last time, you sort of had a market failure approach to this, which it made a lot of sense. It kind of touches on, I think, this notion of choice as well. But I want to push you a little bit on how the Commission and how you're thinking about the sovereignty kind of overlay on what's happening.
I very much agree with my colleagues here in the panel that this needs to be looked as a value chain, and because dependencies exist in Europe throughout that value chain to different degrees and with different root causes. And I think the common thinking about the value chain is not new and not something we need to reinvent now. It's something that has existed since many years. I don't recall from when the first raw material strategy from the Commission is, but it's more than 10 years old. The CHIPS Act is by now 5 or 6 years old. I mean, there is a realization that all those things exist. What hasn't happened yet is on the two elements or the two steps of that value chain that we're trying to tackle with the Cloud and AI Development Act, which is the data center part and the cloud part. So in that sense, it's a new instrument, so we're not reviewing existing instruments. And we're focusing on those two because at some point you need to focus on the individual elements so that altogether your value chain is covered. The two elements, data center and cloud services, are very different. The market structure is different. It's very easy to understand, right, that data center is something physical. You're still in the services industry, but it's something physical, while cloud is virtual, it's software, is immaterial. And the discussion then on autonomy, resilience, independence, sovereignty, put the word you want, is therefore different. In the data center world, I mentioned already the problems of undercapacity in Europe and where we need to get to. Choice, to reuse your word, exists. A lot of that industry is not in European companies, but it's non-European companies owning and operating data center capacity in Europe. The choice exists. It's there's a myriad of companies doing that, and with a lot of European expertise in those, even though they're operated by very often by non-Europeans, companies of engineering, of cooling equipment, of electrical equipment are very often Europeans, and Europeans are world leaders on some of those segments. The question is framed differently when it gets to cloud services, simply because the market structure is very much different. And you know it, I don't need to recall how, for example, the infrastructure as a service in the cloud market in Europe is in the hands of a very few limited amount of non-European players, where Europeans are struggling in that sense, and where, I mean, there's a political move into addressing those dependencies. Yes, we're working on this. The reference or the call for a common definition at European, I've heard the word of seal, or at least common definition, is in our mind and in our carton box, so that at least we prevent for everyone this sovereignty washing that everyone can witness when if you search on your favorite search engine cloud sovereign offers, you will get a myriad of them, and none of them are comparable to each other. And the question of trust very much comes from there, because people feel deceived when you're being told something, but then you get some, where what you get is not what you were promised. And that people can rely more strongly on this type of services, so that we get rid of the trust, which in itself will favor an uptake of cloud services. We're monitoring on a yearly basis the uptake of cloud services by the private sector. We're at 45-46% in Europe, so there's still more than 50% of European businesses who are not using the cloud. And that's not where we should be. And I think that by improving all this trust with the measures I said, we should be able to completely reap the benefits. I mean, usually the nice political declaration starts by reaping the benefits of digital. This is what it means. It's practical steps to create this trust among end users.
Great. Thank you. Eva, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I totally agree that sovereignty means different things to different people. And then we have AI and sovereignty, and then the supply chain, where Europe doesn't own the supply chain. So I think we are in quite a unique position. Myself, I'm European, working for an American company with American technology, and then doing open source models and seeing startups and companies using funds from the Middle East. So the whole supply chain is messed up. You have European talent, American technology, funds mainly coming from the Middle East, if you see the Mistral investments and some other large language model investments, and then open source from China, which no one expected. I think a couple of things we forget. We really have to be street smart in this, now speaking me as a European, of those dynamics, not being conservative against those dynamics, because as Pamela said, we don't own the whole supply chain. We will never do by the components within this supply chain is how those combinations of the different components with the strengths that each region has can play out. And one thing I think quite often forget is open source. Open source on any layer, on the firmware, the middleware, the algorithms, truly open source algorithms or software, really can in this case help to ease the burden of being locked or having choices. And to be able to use open source or to be able to build on top of open source, you need talent, because only talent can deal with the massness of an open source. And this brings to my previous point, where at least talent we have, and we have the control of how we build and cultivate talent. And I will bring again to what Nikolai said from the previous panel. we need to give a bit of a princess treatment to our talent of machine learning engineers and technical people, and then boost their confidence that we have in Europe.
May I add a little bit on that? Because I like what you said about the open source, and I think it's also about access. So especially in these political, very dynamic times, and the values we follow here in the European Union, I think it's important that in our solutions there is a open access to these infrastructures that we're building, and it's not a locked-in thing. And because there's power behind that. Who has data has power. So that's something which is, I think, also a facet of sovereignty at the end, to have open access. And we see that with the gigafactories, that we have a certain way of making calls and who can book those times. This is one thing. The other thing, I mean, at the end, why are we doing this? Yeah, why do we want more uptake from our economy in cloud computing and things like that? Because there is a immense transformation of our economy in different branches, and there is no representative from a company here. But I think that we shouldn't. We started with the question of demand, and we really should focus also on the demand and really the specifics that our companies have, because this is the only reason we're doing it. Actually, yeah, the benefit from AI is only a benefit if it benefits for economic growth, and I'm saying that coming from Germany in our third recession year. So this is really our driver here, and yeah, so we shouldn't forget that in our discussions who we're doing it for. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to turn this ready, but I do want to give the audience an opportunity to come in now. So if you've got questions, now's a good time to raise your hand. We've got one here and one over there. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
And just please introduce yourself and just make sure you ask a question.
Okay. So my name is Veronika Milceva. I'm an expert in the sandbox with the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. Thank you very much for sharing your valuable experience with us. I have like a short comment and a question. So the short comment, because I just heard about the open source and accessibility, etc. So it's a very important thing, but the another thing which we didn't talk today, it's like the IP, patents and other things, and this is the most valuable interest which commercial companies have, so it has to be a balanced thing also with that. And the question which I have, like we all know that in the middle of November, European Commission published the European Data Union strategy, the creation of the specific labs, etc., in order to facilitate this problematic of data access. And but how do you think? Because there are a lot of actions foreseen for 2026 regarding that, and it, in my opinion, demands a lot of involvement of business, also of different companies for different sectors. Will it work really, considering all problems which you have mentioned with the capacities, technical, etc.? So will it really facilitate the thing? Thank you.
It has to, if I may. I think so. So I'm not sure if you refer to a particular aspect of the data union and sharing in particular, but the work we've been conducting over the last years on data spaces is really something that is very specific to Europe, or at least that distinguishes us heavily from an American approach. There's no criticism. It's just that the economy is very different in Europe. In the US, you have large companies that have huge markets who don't need to collaborate with anyone simply because it's their market. In Europe, the shape of the economy is very different. In Germany in particular, but I'm thinking as well in Italy, in northern Spain, you have a tissue of SMEs which is extremely dense and which is the one that creates the wealth, the real wealth of Europe, and therefore this is where the growth potential is. But in an era of data and not only the classic good old products and services, you need those SMEs to collaborate, and the collaboration cannot be one-on-one, because setting one-on-one collaboration works, but one-to-many is very difficult, and many-to-many is impossible if you do it one after another. So you need an approach where you develop those ecosystems called data spaces of SMEs, supply chain, or horizontal collaboration, where you set up trust mechanisms in between those companies to collaborate together. And I think that's the work that my colleagues, and we're supporting them from an infrastructure and software point of view, are trying to bring forward. And that was at least one of the strong messages of the Data Union strategy presented last month.
Was there another question over there at the back?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin, currently working as a business analyst for the Belgium high voltage grid operator. Currently, we're focusing mainly on the increased energy consumption, but the biggest focus is on consumer mobility, meaning electrical cars. Now, the need for electrical cars in terms of grid usage, you have many small consumers, whereas for data centers and gigafactories, you have fewer big consumers. Do you see the impact of data centers and gigafactories to be larger than consumer mobility, and how do you ensure the focus of the grid operators is in the right place?
I'm not sure if anyone, yeah.
I can start coming from having an energy background maybe, but I think it's a good thing that's a different demand. There you are, and this is also, as you said before, when we look at where should we build those data centers, it obviously should not be in urban, dense spaces because of the grid challenges that we're having. So this, I think, this is part of the business models if you develop such a center. But when we talk about energy, we have to look again at the whole value chain, because producing chips is also very energy intensive, and this will also grow. We want that to grow, right? We want chip production also in Europe, and so this is also an aspect which we have to look at if we're building up manufacturing places for that. Where should they be? And also there, do we have spaces in Europe which are not so dense than maybe Frankfurt?
If I try to complement, and sorry for the eyesight. Today's data center capacity consumes about 3% of European energy, with, as I said earlier, very it's not 3% everywhere, right? This is bound to go higher, 8, 10, 11% in the coming 10 years. I understand from speaking to some of your colleagues that this is still well below the projections either of the mobility sector or of the electrification of the industry in general. But that at the same time, the electrification of mobility is going slower than anticipated. Maybe not drastically, but sufficiently to, at the moment, see a decrease in energy consumption in Europe altogether, even if very light. What I think is a fundamental difference in between those two uses is that a typical data center comes with a number of facilities that makes their integration in grids much easier and much more potentially useful if properly equipped. They have let me skip the acronyms. They have battery systems. They can provide flexibility services to the grid, which are not unthinkable in other areas. And I've seen plenty of good ideas there in those for others, but it kind of comes built in, and it comes naturally for data center operators. Yesterday, the Commission adopted Commission guidelines on grid, a very dense but very interesting reading if you have the time, encouraging member states to move from a first come from serve approach when being served by the grid, when accessing the grid, to a first ready first serve approach in general. And I think data centers definitely have good cards in their hands to demonstrate that they're ready for being connected to the grid.
Great. Well, I think this conversation is the beginning of what is going to be undoubtedly a lot of conversations over the next 6, 12 and 18 months going forward. This is going to be a growing area of focus and importance for businesses and for policy. We've spoken today about trust, choice, controlling the value chain, versions of sovereignty, and we didn't even really touch in a lot of detail around the energy piece and the bottlenecks and how we kind of respond to those. So I want to firstly thank the panelists for their engagement and for their excellent kind of responses to the difficult questions. There are no easy questions at the moment. Swati, thank you so much for being online and taking time from across the world and for the conversation and your responses around digital public infrastructure. And I'm going to call this panel to a close and hand it off to my colleague, Andrea Renda, for the next panel. Thanks, everyone.
To tell you a little bit what the next panel is about. I mean, we've heard quite a lot of emphasis on, and also quite a lot of concrete indications in the last panel on the fact that we need to move to deployment, uptake, adoption of AI. So we've been spending years talking about legislation, creating the frameworks, or creating maybe the scientific breakthroughs and so on. But what is happening on the ground, right? What are the use cases that are emerging? Are companies able to take up the new use cases and solutions that emerge from AI? And so this session has been titled Charting an AI-Ready Future. How do we seize the promise of AI? It is very, and also promising in and of itself as a session. We have for this session four very good speakers from very different walks of life. So I think we will explore many different aspects of how is AI landing in the world of government, in the world of financial services, and different industrial firms that are in really working on different use cases, how in the world of work things are shaping up, and also how the cybersecurity element and the IT skills that everybody is looking for, or the use cases that are emerging there, are also likely to play a role in this picture. That's very important if you think at this from an EU perspective, because again, I mentioned that earlier this morning, although for some of you it might seem like 2 weeks ago, but it was still today, this conference earlier today when we heard from the Irish minister. The Apply AI strategy is really now going to deep dive as part of the AI continent strategy, to do deep dives into at least 10 sectors and start asking the difficult questions, right? What is the concrete technology stack that applies to that sector? What are the emerging use cases? What are the risks and the mitigating measures? What are the opportunities that are out there? What is the ecosystem aspect? So what are the skills that we need to bring forward? So our four speakers, you see them ready to start and excited to join the panel. The first one is Ennio Caso, Director of AI and Cryptocurrency Licensing at the National Agency for Information Society of Albania. We will hear from Ennio first, and as soon as I've introduced also the other speakers, because as of when I'm finished, I'm going to call you all by first name, if you allow me. Then we have Kip Wainscott, who is Executive Director of Global AI Policy at JP Morgan Chase. Matthew Jensen, Senior Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at Indeed. And finally, Liga Raita Rosenthal, if I pronounce your name 5 out of 10. So her face says, okay, you could have, I've heard even worse, okay. And Director of Public Policy, EU and International at CrowdStrike. So, Ennio, we start with you, and we'll give more or less 5 minutes to each of the speakers to get us started with their thoughts. Then I will somehow ask you to a little bit crossfire to some extent, comment on each other's findings and see whether we can find some commonalities, and then we open up to the audience for the discussion, right? Ennio, get us started. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Ennio, Director of AI at the National Agency for Information Society in Albania. We essentially are responsible for, as an agency, for all the digital systems across the ministries and the central government, as well as the infrastructure that hosts these systems. In the late few years, we have also been developing and shipping AI products. Some of the most well-known ones are, I'll start with Diela. It's our virtual assistant, which essentially assists citizens 24/7 in our digital service platform. Essentially, citizens can now go into our national digital service platform and ask, hey, Diela, in Albanian, just by speaking, can I have a family certificate? And she will provide it for you within seconds. Now we even promoted her as an AI minister, the first AI minister in the world. But aside joking, obviously as a minister, she has different set of capabilities and functionalities, which we essentially got as a basis from launching the first version of Diela communicating with citizens, and also some of our other AI system. Another key AI system which we launched back in early 2024 is our AI module for helping speed up the process of Albania joining the EU. As some of you may know, Albania is negotiating to be part of the EU. And back in 2023, it was actually the Prime Minister of Albania himself who asked the CTO of OpenAI, Ms. Mira Murati at the time, how can we utilize AI to speed up the process of Albania joining the EU? Immediately, she hooked us up directly with some of her best engineers, where we started to explore the key bottlenecks to speed up this process. We identified two steps. The first one was translation, and the second one was essentially approximating the legal basis of EU directives and regulations into the Albanian one. As an example, it took Croatia 7 years to do the approximation of the legal basis and an army of translators. We are aiming, with the inclusion of AI, to finish that process within 2 years, approximately. So far, we launched that project successfully, and back in July, we even won an award for that process in Geneva, Switzerland, organized by ITO. These are just some of our current initiatives that we have, but obviously we have many more, but I'm going to pass the floor to my colleagues.
Yeah, I might ask you a follow-up question on this, because I think there will be a lot of curiosity in the room. I think, first of all, you have set a very interesting example and standard and taken a leadership. Of course, there was a comment from Ukraine before. There's been quite a lot being done there as well on mainstreaming AI developments in government. There's a recent OECD report on AI in government that actually places in the use cases public service delivery rather than legislation as the most common one, the most frequent one reported by OECD countries. And that is one very important case. I mean, for me, just looking on the other side of the Adriatic Sea and Ionian Sea, if you look at my original country, I think it takes a good 6 months only to get a reply, right? Rather than before you imagine like chatbots or conversational bots powered by AI, and you sort of win a lottery if you want to renew your passport. So I think there's a lot that you can teach the rest of Europe in this, and experience that you will probably have in dealing with accession negotiations is that sometimes you might be even too fast, I mean, compared to what the response on the other side might be. So get ready for this. A little bit of patience, because these things take a bit of time. But meanwhile, the European Commission is also speeding up a lot of internal case studies. Is there anything specific that you can say about the design of that system? For example, in order to avoid hallucinating, does it use a specific set of curated data, for example, from inside the administration? What is the design of the system that makes it trustworthy for citizens, if you can share anything in that respect?
So obviously this system has multiple mechanisms which make it work, but I'm going to skip and say some of the biggest hurdles that we actually had during the development of the system. Albania is a small resource language. Most of the modules that are already available out there have poor support for Albanian language. Hence, there is lots of hallucinations, lots of unexpected output and results, which makes our development team essentially having to innovate and find workarounds in order to make these LLMs work. I think that aside what we have as an application layer trying to push innovation and trying to push systems, this setback of having support for small language models also is kind of hurting us in another way. I'm going to give an example, let's say something which we encountered lately, social media. Social medias use very good AI algorithms to push content out there, to moderate, to keep safety, and to have access. Now imagine if these AI algorithms do the pushing, but the AI algorithms to do the moderations for certain languages don't work. It means that teenagers, youngsters will get promoted content which is harassment, bullying, profanity, and all other sorts of hazards and examples. This means that the quality of services being delivered by systems which uses AI are not as good in smaller resource languages such as Albanian, but they are very good in, let's say, United Kingdom or Germany or France or Spain, etc.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this. I think it's important also for many of the participants that work on applications of AI in government, especially in countries that have languages, for example, national languages that are not so widely spoken, and this creates an issue. I know that yesterday we had dinner with the representatives from Microsoft. They said that they're looking pretty much into multilingual AI and also AI in less, spoken languages, less available languages for AI applications. So that is, I guess, promising when we look at the future. I want to move to Kip, and again, it's a different perspective, right? From the perspective of JP Morgan Chase. What is your collection of stories about how AI is taken up by industry, for example?
No, thanks so much, Andrea. This is a fascinating conversation. Do I have a slide that there we are.
Yeah, the slide is up. Okay.
The slide is up. You can see this is my first time participating in the International Summit, and you can tell I came equipped with a very modest topic here: the geopolitics of AI for the whole world, and I want to speak to it over the course of just a few minutes, but. Just a little bit of context first. I mean, my team is positioned at JP Morgan Chase as a sort of firm-wide center of excellence on global AI and data policy issues. And so when we think about sort of unlocking the promise of AI, we're looking at it sort of through a policy lens. What are the regulations, the standards, the policy frameworks that are going to advance interoperability and safety and security across the value chain? And at JP Morgan Chase, the firm is navigating a very complex business environment, and AI is really at the center of it. We are, of course, one of the world's largest banks, but we are also one of the most experienced deployers of artificial intelligence in a very sort of regulated industry. We've been deploying classical machine learning, predictive AI for the better part of a decade to combat fraud and anti-money laundering. That's resulted in protection for consumers to the tune of $12 billion in fraud loss prevention savings just in the past year. And so really concrete business outcomes and protections from AI. We're also one of the world's largest purchasers of these technologies. And as a procurer, we have a deeply ingrained sort of interest in the allocation of responsibility across the value chain. We also maintain really robust and rigorous technology operations. We employ more than 30,000 software engineers. We maintain a machine learning center of excellence, more than 110 machine learning and AI PhDs, 2,000 dedicated AI and data professionals within our firm-wide Chief Data and Analytics Office. All of this context just is to say that our interests here and our stakes in the AI future are very multi-layered, they're intersectional, they're very complex. And so it's really incumbent upon us to think about sort of the macro environment in which this future is sort of taking shape. And it's been important, I think, as a business to internalize the fact that the geopolitics globally, these themes, they're not an abstraction. They're not sort of merely political posturing or theater. They really do define the operating environment in which we're making these business decisions, we're making these investments in AI. And they are probably the most reliable sort of watchwords or touch points or evidence of the direction of travel for how this future is going to take shape. And so sort of in recognition of that, we partnered with the Center for Geopolitics to release a report last month on the geopolitics of AI. There is a lot to unpack here, and it's a long report. There's also a lot of geopolitical expertise here in the room, and so I'm not going to dive into all of these, but I do just kind of want to signal sort of, what our key observations are. We really distilled the report into 7 trends or axes, as we call them, that are really shaping the environment as this future takes hold. The first is an assertive China. There's a lot to say about China's role in this ecosystem, but I think that 3 things that are most kind of notable are just sort of the state-driven approach to AI diffusion. There's sort of a subsidized approach. There are compute vouchers that are being issued across the provinces to drive adoption. Their ability to run a top-down state-led strategy to build out energy resiliency, investments in renewables and the expansion of their energy grid, and also state-sponsored research and development. And sort of on the other side of that pole, you have a repositioned United States. I don't think that it's controversial to say that the election of Donald Trump was perhaps the most significant geopolitical development in AI over the past year. And I think what's most notable about it isn't necessarily sort of the policy positioning of the Trump administration. Its emphasis on national security and on energy expansion is not dissimilar from the themes of the previous administration. But what is very different is sort of the US government's orientation now to the international community and its orientation to the tech industry. And speaking of the international community, there's been a lot of conversation about Europe's and pursuit of tech sovereignty. The previous discussion, I think, gave a lot of thoughtful attention to this. I won't say much more. I think that in this particular moment, as many of you in the room know better than me, sovereignty has been sort of a recurring political theme in Europe for a relatively long time. But what's really interesting about this moment is that, one, this conversation is happening in the context of a very tense and kind of fraying of the transatlantic relationship. The other is that the EU finds itself as a world leader right now in sort of the maturity of the policy and regulatory environment for technology, including AI. And that's created space for these conversations around simplification and around sort of strategic autonomy that I think are just especially salient right now. Anyone who's been following the build out of infrastructure globally, you've probably noticed that the Middle East is playing a very prominent role, sovereign wealth funds. And what is, I think, interesting about this is the way that that capital has positioned a lot of these countries to develop strategic partnerships with major technology developers and governments, including the U.S. government. And then, talent populism in the workforce, I think, has some obvious implications for sort of the political currents. There was some conversation previously about energy and hardware and componentry as sort of strategic choke points across supply chains right now. And then, of course, the future of defense and the military integration of AI has really just sort of elevated the stakes here, I think, as we think about the urgency of this moment and sort of alignment. And so just to kind of round this out, I want to bring this back to sort of why this matters and what it means for, kind of unlocking an AI future and sort of for the policy environment. And I think the risks of, I think this reflects a lot of repositioning right now of geopolitically, to put it modestly. And that has some obvious risks. I think increasing fragmentation, divergent regulatory approaches that just contribute to uncertainty, maybe divergent perspectives of trust and reliability. All of these are potential pitfalls of a sort of swirling repositioning of these geopolitical factors. But I think it also creates some promising opportunities. These shifting dynamics, I think what they most reflect is a shared recognition globally that this is a moment of significance, perhaps such great significance that it cannot be, that it cannot be missed, and that it must be seized, and that maybe it's too significant to get wrong. And that means that there is space, I think, for all of us in this room, and particularly for voices kind of beyond the model developers and hyperscalers, but across the value chain at this kind of deployment stage and layer of this second phase of the AI revolution, to really communicate what good looks like, to present a vision for why a shared set of values, why a shared commitment to interoperability, to safety, to security, to building trust around these tools is a shared interest across these jurisdictions. It will promote business opportunities. It will promote more responsible and more aligned technology stack. And I think that we at JP Morgan Chase are just particularly keen to identify partners in this endeavor and to sort of communicate that forward. And so looking forward to discussing it further.
Thanks a lot, Kip. And we'll get back to you later, because I still want to know from you, from your unique vantage point, where you think the bottleneck is, sort of the most likely one. And there's a lot of talk about energy. There's a lot of talk about, and we're going to talk about talent now. And there's a lot of talk about a potential bubble. And so, I still might want to provoke you a little bit on that later, but we go to Matthew. Because Matthew, from your perspective, you actually, and for me as a researcher, you are like a unique resource, right? Because it's a go-to place for understanding job listings and the evolution of job openings and the demand for new skills, right? So when you chart the future work, you have an observational point, which is absolutely great. So happy to hear your perspective on how you see things changing and evolving in various industries, right, as a result of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this opportunity. It's the practical conversation, right? Like, what is happening in the labor market right now? From the Indeed perspective, we represent a real-time and near complete picture of the supply and demand of the labor market, right? Of the largest single markets across the globe, across every sector and industry. And so through our data, we're able to derive trends and analysis of what is happening, how is it being adopted, what are the evolution of the applications. And I think overwhelmingly what we have seen is that in the practical sense, not in the fantastical hypothetical of what AI could be, it's an augmenting tool, right? I mean, we are seeing efficiencies being driven, productivity being driven at the enterprise and SME levels. It's important because that being the value proposition, which we hope to be centered in many of the conversations around AI, instead of just the potential disruptions or negative aspects that it could be, right? So, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later from labor market shortages, right? Efficiencies can help solve some of the labor shortages that may exist. As well as from the Indeed perspective, we see incredible opportunity in better connecting job seekers with the right employment opportunities. That provides a better economic and social benefit. Why? When you do have a better connection, that means there is higher productivity from that individual, their team, and their department. It also means that there's a lower turnover for that firm, which, according to Cedefop, between 30 and 70% of cost in the annual salary or wage can be lost in turnover. That's significant from an SME perspective, right? And so we see an incredible value there in having a better connection, right? The better you are aligned from your capabilities and the expectation from the employer, the more likely you are to enjoy your time at work, your higher satisfaction, your higher enjoyment and social value that's derived there. So we're huge trends that we're seeing across the board. Yes, when you segment it out, particularly from ICT, you are having greater demand for AI skills and capabilities. But when you look at it across the board of all sectors or all industries, it still remains a relatively small percentage of the skills that are demanded. So the question being, well, what are the skills that are in high demand, even with or in companion with those AI or digital skills? Critical thinking, that is the #1 demanded skill by employers across every sector. It's the analytical capabilities. It's the ability to take a problem, understand what it means for your business or your operation, and how to apply it in order to provide a better product or service. It's the communication skills. It's these fundamental skills that we've sometimes glossed over, I think, over the last few years. There's been a huge shift over the last 20 years talking about STEM, which was sort of the end result, STEM careers. The hope now is I think we get to a conversation around, well, what are those critical capabilities that are provided in STEM education? And it is that critical thinking, it is that analytical capabilities. Stepping back, I think, from the government opportunity perspective, as part of this conversation, we see a few opportunities. One, overwhelmingly our data shows private sector use, adoption, and investment is derived in part from public sector adoption, right? There's a correlation there. Second, legal and regulatory predictability or reliability. The certainty that's provided by government is invaluable in the private sector. And then I would say from a third point, the role and value of data, right? Like we've talked about big data for such a long time. It's kind of a phrase that's been handed over. But now through AI, our utilization and access to big data is incredible. And so now we're able to have more calculated conversations of what is actually happening in the labor market. What are the workforce trends? And so pairing private sector data with government data provides that complete picture to have those conversations.
Thank you. That's fascinating. But to some extent, there's also a sort of inter-panel discussion here, because one of the earlier panels today, we had heard a lot more emphasis on STEM coding from one of the speakers, which sounded a little bit strange to me, because what we see in the literature, but also in the labor market, is actually this shift towards analytical and critical skills, right? And not necessarily the emphasis on something that we know that people have to learn early on in education, but perhaps will be done by machines going forward rather than by humans. Plus the domain-specific competences, right, that remain very important and key, or even more than in the past as AI starts permeating the different sectors. So thanks for this overview. I think it adds a lot to our conversation and makes it richer. But we're going to get back to some of these aspects perhaps when we go into the Q&A and some of the interaction between the speakers. So I'll go first to Liga to have her contribution, and then we start our interaction. So Liga, please, from the perspective of CrowdStrike, which is again yet another perspective, what do you see?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I'm head of public policy in EMEA for CrowdStrike. For those of you who may not know, CrowdStrike is an AI native, cloud native cybersecurity platform. So we've been ingrained in the discussions on AI for over a decade, and it's really a pleasure to be here to discuss the opportunities provided by AI. We focus very much on the negatives of emerging technologies, but it's sometimes a relief to take a break and focus on the very positive things coming out of technology that's really reshaping all of our institutions, our economies, but it's also very much reshaping how we look at security models so that we can adopt new technology in secure, safe ways that really gives a lot of thought to what we're doing in different sectors with new technologies. As I said, I think that there's a bright light for us in the future in cybersecurity with AI. And we have been using AI for a long time in our company. This is, of course, a very core part of how we evaluate the threats that we address with customers and with all sorts of organizations that we work with. So AI has been central to detecting threats for a very long time. It is absolutely essential, and it's an indispensable part of cybersecurity. In a modern security operations center, you cannot go without AI. You need AI agents now to triage all of your alerts and analyze malware and hunt for emerging threats. This simply cannot be done without. So how's this a very positive thing? It's how AI has been developing has very much alleviated the pressure created by global talent shortages. So we have to look at, so to be able to take advantage of what AI is giving us and the tools that it's giving us, we really have to look at how we are managing technology in our organizations, what is the cultural shift necessary, and what is the regulatory framework in these things, so that the opportunities remain opportunities, not just challenges that we're struggling with all the time. So applying AI, we very much encourage to look at AI not as a side project, but something that's ingrained in all of the processes that we do. How do we keep the human in the loop oversight? How do we have the knowledge base? And how are the decisions that we're putting to AI really fast but also trusted? So that's one point. More on the cultural shift. We have to look at how we categorize roles within our organization and how the junior to senior approach to our staff is changed and influenced by AI. How can we reskill the staff that we have with AI and the tools that we have so that we can reach those greater capabilities and efficiency and security for us? Certainly. And that needs to be done with a lot of transparency and training and a clear articulation how human judgment stays in control. So we never want to forget about that. And also looking at kind of the regulatory frameworks that need to be in place, we really want to look at what are the risks that we address when implementing AI, and in what contexts is AI being implemented? So we can discuss maybe a little bit later how regulation should differ in different forms of use of AI, but this is quite valid, especially when differentiating between business-to-business AI, consumer use of AI, agentic AI, and so forth. But it would be amiss if I didn't also focus on the threat of AI. And from a cybersecurity perspective, AI is driving threats astronomically, and the ability to craft more convincing phishing emails and automate vulnerability discovery, and everything is sped up with AI. So we must be sure to emphasize that AI is indeed an absolute and imperative defensive capability that we have to maintain. And by slowing down on the innovation in this sense, on the defensive side, is certainly a risk. And one last positive that I do want to emphasize, reflecting a little bit on the last panel, is also that cybersecurity is definitely global. And we as a company have found the very state-of-the-art skills that we need in Europe. We are an American company, however, our data scientists are in Romania. Our log-scale capabilities are in Denmark, and our AI data refinement is now coming from Spain. So Europe, in one sense, there are success stories that the environment of European research development is really producing the skills that we need as a global leader in cybersecurity to apply AI as it needs to be.
Well, thank you very much. And that's also very good news that, we've been talking for a long time about the IT skills shortage in Europe, and there's also surface there, right? So first thing is a follow-up question to you, Liga, is whether cybersecurity, we can finally state that cybersecurity is essentially an AI versus AI issue today, meaning not that AI only, but AI and humans on the one hand, and AI and humans on, on the defense and on the attack side. And so basically defending you without massive use of AI is a no-go today.
Yes. No, I could say much more about this. And in our threat reports, we put out the very specific ways that AI is being used. But it upscales everybody, and it speeds up the pace. The lateral movement that adversaries now have is sped up to seconds instead of hours and weeks. And we need to be able to detect as fast as humanly possible. Not as fast as humanly possible, excuse me, but as fast as AI allows us to.
Faster than humanly possible,
faster
right?
Than humanly possible.
So one step beyond, is cybersecurity becoming an AI agents versus AI agents issue?
Yes. I think this is the way forward. The way that we are working on developing our platform to be able to incorporate agentic agents to understand how the processes that need to flow, the workflow that needs to be in place to be able to understand, analyze, mitigate, and do as much as possible without the human in the loop is essential, but then also understanding how we can get the most impactful attacks to be in the hands of the human when it needs to be.
So this leads me to a question that I want to ask to all our other panelists. Does it mean that human in the loop is impossible? Meaning we have to reconsider what human oversight means in a number of use cases. And I don't know if you see in the job market, for example, or in government services, or in the broader setting that Kip has given us, an acceleration of AI deployment in situations where having a human in between the output of the machine and the decision is impossible, right? Matthew, you want to say something about it?
Sure, yeah, I can go briefly. I think sometimes we talk about AI in sort of a homogeneous way of broad application, right? But I think appropriately responding is in a sectoral perspective, right? I mean, when you look at a frontline worker in manufacturing or transportation, right? Like that is wholly AI in the loop as a user of it, right? On the back end, it's the AI oversight and the deployment and the oversight and assessment and post-deployment, right? But when you look at ICT roles, you may have a little bit more of an AI-led initiative, but it's still, at least from the Indeed perspective, humans driving the robots, right?
Yeah. Let me see if others want to chip in on this, because then I will have a follow-up question. I don't know if you've seen yet where I'm going, but I'm still figuring that out. But
I mean, I would just echo Matthew's reflections there and add that, I don't think that risk management, we shouldn't view this as out of reach for us. There is a culture of risk management in financial services that is very mature, very robust, and has navigated waves of innovation over the past half century very, very effectively from my perspective. And I most recently, before coming to JP Morgan Chase, I worked in the tech industry, and I would say that the biggest cultural shift moving from tech to a financial house is this culture of risk management. And there are approaches and lessons and learnings that I think that can contribute to this policy conversation, and I suspect that elsewhere across the value chain there are similarly ideas, safeguards, and other mitigations that can be put in place, and we just need to sort of, I think, accelerate the urgency of these conversations a little bit.
And as I continue exploring, the different use cases, now you live, Kip, in the world of high frequency transactions, right? I remember many years ago the flash crash at 245. I mean, it's very famous in the industry, right? The stock exchange in the US, because two algorithms start chasing each other and spiraling down, and your stock exchange indexes go down 9.2%, hundreds of millions burnt, and so on and so forth. There are certain things that cannot be done with a human in the loop. That's why when I was a member of the high-level expert group on AI many, many years ago, now 2018 to 2020, we started differentiating between cases of human in the loop, human on the loop, someone that oversees and perhaps can stop, not immediately, not between the action is taking place, but with a sort of kill switch if a system starts going off track, right? But so human oversight, that's where I wanted to go in. I don't know if Ennio has a view on government services there, changes shape and skin depending on the use case. And I have something to say about the AI Act about this, but I want to say see whether Ennio has a comment on this or whether Kip wants to bounce back on the flash crash at 2:45, which actually happened though.
Regarding the
Yeah,
regarding the human in the loop, I have a very interesting example. Last year, we launched this solution targeted to line ministries and the legal directories. Where essentially we utilize AI to find discrepancies within our legal law. Let's say two different laws have an article which overlaps between one another and they are published by different ministries. So essentially AI is doing two key processes in this solution, analyzing what's already in our current legislation, and also is an extra step of prior to pushing new legislation, check it with AI if it's overlapping with something in existence or not. All that the human operators have to do, obviously, they have to check and verify if the output of the AI is correct, and obviously they have all the manual triggers to register and assess the new overlap. So what we found out is that essentially most of the legal directors were actually stating, is the really AI going to replace us? Like, what are we doing here? Like, this isn't working, this is not correct. But in fact, when seeing the usage, they weren't actually using the system at all. And the most interesting thing is that for this particular system, even though it's only accessed by legal departments, the legal department in the Ministry of Justice is the one which uses it the most and proactively every day to check if it's if the project acts that they're pushing are overlapping with something, or if they can mature something in these drafts or not, which is quite interesting indeed.
If I could jump, sure, absolutely. I think to that point, and I think the previous point made on the responsibility of government from an adoption perspective, one of the byproducts or benefits of that from a public sector procurement of AI systems is it helps to demystify or destigmatize AI, what it is and what it isn't, right? Which then has a direct impact on regulatory or legal approaches, right? And being able to dissect or understand the use cases and appropriate frameworks according to those respective risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to say about the EU regulatory framework at this stage is that somehow we're still halfway, right? I'm sorry for those of you that thought we were done or starting to go backwards. Well, we are halfway in the sense that we might deepen the rules in specific sectors through soft law, interpretive guidance, or through reliance on sectoral regulators. It doesn't have to be that yet another piece of cross-cutting EU legislation, but it's one example of one regulatory requirement, which is human oversight, might be interpreted in a completely different way where it comes to government services as opposed to cybersecurity or autonomous vehicles or triage system in hospitals. I mean, there's all things that might and are defined as high risk, right, under the AI Act. But this list of remedies then has a different meaning in different sectors. So the deepening of this into what does it mean and how do you create regulatory certainty in different sectors will take an additional interpretive guidance effort, and cybersecurity might take a completely different one. The other thing that I wanted to say that I think has emerged before I start asking the audience whether you have questions, so you start warming up, and because at some point I'm going to ask who has a question, so you have to train your arm to be the first one to raise your hand, is the fact that it seems to be a rather new way in which the four of you together have configured the skills element in the future of AI use cases. We have been used for a long time to talk about two things: The first one is the lack of IT skills, and Liga's told us a completely different story. I mean, for Europe, the fact that we have like millions and millions of IT experts that we need to create in the digital decade targets between now and 2030, and so on and so forth. And the other thing that we've spoken about over the past years very often is what we call de-skilling, right? The fact that you can have your legal department looking at what AI has done, in a critical way. The more you keep doing it, the more you rely on the machine, and then you end up in a situation similar to what the National Transportation Safety Board in the US last year mentioned in a report, basically that nobody can fly a plane anymore, right? Because either you have the support of the AI system, but if all of a sudden you are without AI support, you don't know what to do. And that applies to doctors, applies to many others. But what I've seen from you, it's actually perhaps a different thing. There's one reassuring element that I saw and one more worrying one. So let me elaborate on this. So the reassuring element is that there are skills, even in Europe, that are still central, and you have to locate them where they are, and we'd have to continue to nurture them, perhaps in a different way going forward as AI evolves alongside with humans. The other one, but again, this is to provoke you, maybe you bounce back immediately on me, is that we seem to be a bit less worried about the shortage of IT skills in parts of the world, because we know that there is a possibility to replace those missing IT skills with AI. Some of your presentations have caught some of those elements. I don't know if you agree with me, meaning that, for example, SMEs are not doomed, or companies in general, because even if they don't have all the skills that are needed, AI is actually tapping into those, and so it can actually lead to cost reductions and so on and so forth. This, to me, might mean different things in terms of the impacts on the job market, of course. Might also go, in some cases, for lack of the skills, because we are too slow to create those skills that are needed, into a situation that economists, like, for example, Daron Acemoglu or Pascual Restrepo in the past have called so-so automation. Like, we automate certain jobs, even if this leads to a little reduction in quality, because that's the best alternative that we have. I don't know if anybody has a comment on this, where people see whether they have exercised their hand, because
yeah, I think there's a whole summit dedicated to answering that question, right? A couple of points. I think anecdotally on, is there a one-to-one replacement of skills and capabilities, right? I think if anyone has queried an LLM in a subject matter that you know, there's a difference in its result versus querying it on a subject matter that you don't know, right? It's easier to identify hallucinations, what works, what doesn't, what's applicable in the areas that you do know. And so I think that drives to the point, like, you still need subject matter experts, right? I think it speaks to a perhaps quality conversation of those experts over the quantity, which we have had historically. I think the other, on the skilling side of things, you break it up into different segments within the workforce, right? Early career, mid-career. But I think what needs to happen is a very robust education conversation, right, of the pipeline of what we're happening. From a data set perspective, we are all about to witness a fascinating use case of an AI native workforce coming in to the workforce, right? Where new graduates, new entrants into the workforce who have largely in their upper education been trained with AI tools. It'll be fascinating to see how they perform, right? And then stepping back more broadly, the skilling conversation for us at least is really about taxonomy, right? Is being able to dissect what those skills actually are. And thanks to AI, what we thought were 2 or 3 skills are actually 14 or 15 skills, right? And so being able to better map those quantity and quality of skills to the needs is where we'll be able to see some of those operational benefits and outputs.
Thanks, Matthew. Liga, go ahead.
I'd also like to jump.
Yeah, keep it closer. Yeah.
I'd also like to jump in on this and certainly emphasize that it's not a replacement of people that AI is doing for cybersecurity. It's more of assisting the people that we already have to be able to combat the challenges that we see. And it's also the ability to take lower skilled employees and upscale what they do. For instance, if you're working in a security operations center and you don't have the highest level of coding, you can use natural language prompts to get the same result as if you were able to, code and inject. And that allows careers to develop differently, but certainly in a positive way, to get people upskilled on the job rather than being able to switch into cybersecurity in a more cumbersome way.
Yeah,
Very good.
just adding on that, this is a little bit anecdotal, but within JP Morgan Chase, to Liga's point about sort of the assistive nature of this technology, there's been a lot of sort of direction related to managerial skills and just preparing our workforce for a future in which every employee is a manager and has sort of that competency of performance evaluation and of accountability. And those are skills that not everybody in the workforce has had to develop previously, but now in an era where everyone has a virtual assistant that is, really contributing to their workflows and their productivity, it's going to be an important skill set, and it's a very teachable one. And so there's a lot of thoughtful attention to how we can kind of develop resilience and performance through those types of trainings.
Super. I don't know if anything to add to this, or we collect questions from the floor.
Nothing to add.
Okay. So let me see through a show of hands, who has the intention to ask a question. I see Cam there. I don't see anything here because I have my light in my face. So I'm sorry, these people are not going to be able to ask any question. No, I'm kidding. Let me see if there's anybody here. So Cam, you can go ahead. And meanwhile, others, if you can signal to me so that I can also time the answers because, yeah.
Thank you. For those who weren't here earlier, I'm Cam Carey from the Brookings Institution. My question is to Liga first and foremost, but Andrea, you mentioned the notion of a kill switch, and Luca Bertuzzi also mentioned that in the first panel this morning. I talked with him afterwards, and it turns out he had in mind a different kind of kill switch than the internal kill switch that Andrea spoke of. But the notion that there would be government operated or government compelled kill switches, and particularly for American companies. So my question to you, Liga, is how CrowdStrike, as a company that's American, that's dealing with security, and similarly situated companies address that concern that underlies some of the concerns about exposure to U.S. companies.
You can give an encrypted answer if you want. A cyber-secure answer.
This a bit deviates off the topics of how we're skilling in SOCs, but okay. I could take a stab at it, recognizing that one company cannot control the geopolitics of a global actor, and certainly we don't pretend to have that kind of influence. I think we all have the challenge of working in an environment that is very challenging in the tech space, whether it's a European company or an American-based company, and I think for us, this concept of a kill switch is something that we realize is being discussed, but as businesses, we have to show that we are predictable, we are reliable, we follow the rules of the governments of the countries in which we function, where our customers are. And as a company, as I mentioned, I would say a quarter to a third of our capabilities are based in Europe. If we had some disruption in the transatlantic system, we simply couldn't operate. So to think about a kill switch, I am much more worried on a daily basis about the adversary use of AI and attacks on our economies throughout Europe on a daily basis that pose a much realistic threat to our daily operations. And we can discuss kill switches in anecdotal situations, but I think that daily risk that we face in cybersecurity is very imperative for us to keep working on and using state-of-the-art technology to be able to address it on a daily basis.
All right, so we got 2 minutes to go. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to ask a question to each of you. That will we're completely off script, as you know, but I mean that's you expected it from me, right? So, but you just give it an answer. This doesn't hold you accountable for what you're saying. It's just like a joke, okay? So I'm going to ask Ennio. Don't answer immediately, but Ennio, how many AI ministers do you think Albania will have in 5 years from now? I will ask Kip, and I don't want to answer immediately. I will ask Kip so that they get ready. Meanwhile, you also can think about it. Kip, whether you think in the next 5 years many of the LLMs and the AI systems will become personalized, because you referred to that. So you will have many many people with personalized assistants also on the marketplace. I might ask Matt whether what we've discussed so far means that Dario Amodei is not right in saying that half of the white-collar jobs will be wiped away in the next 5 years. And I would ask Liga, perhaps, whether she thinks, what she thinks is or actually, no, I'll make it simpler because you've already got a pretty nasty question from Cam. Whether you think Europe has some elements in its cybersecurity governance that would require reform or more centralization or more deepening, because we still have pretty much 27 different cybersecurity systems and exerts and asserts and all these things. Do you get all the help from the collection of data that you would need, or is there anything, if you had the magic wand of the policymaker, that you would do to make Europe a stellar place in cybersecurity? So let's go back to Enyo. This can be a very short answer, or I can also say, like in Zen philosophy, you say the answer is mu. Unask the questions. I'm not interested in that, but okay.
If something can be automized, let's automize it. In the end, it's only 19 job roles, which I'm sure these people can find some other job.
Yeah, there's not a big impact on the labor market anyway. Okay, that's good.
Yes, I do think that there's going to be a proliferation of personalization across these technologies. I also heard you ask about the policy environment, and I'm optimistic that there's going to be a coalition around sort of principles-based frameworks that emerge among rights-respecting countries and economies.
Cool, thank you very much, Matt.
Absolutely. I mean, 5 years, who knows, right? So current function is largely augmenting, right, from a productivity tool perspective. But drawing from CrowdStrike, I mean, 30 years ago, IT cybersecurity roles largely non-existent and now very robust, right? And so I think from a jobs opportunity perspective is where you'll see a lot of AI contributions in the future.
Thank you.
I could only comment that I think the cybersecurity regulatory environment is very robust in Europe, and I've had the pleasure of shaping that over the last more than a decade here in Brussels in various roles. But I can say, looking at maybe the future of AI regulation, I would only caution that there are so many different applications of AI. We have to be careful that we don't, throw the baby out with the bathwater, that we don't regulate on perhaps judicial sentencing for a criminal the same way as we do AI security on a critical infrastructure. So I'll leave it at that.
Very good. Sort of precision regulation, if you wish. Just like precision medicine or other things. So these 4 panelists have been very flexible and adaptive and agile, because they didn't know that I would ask all these questions. So I would ask you, as we are about to break for lunch, to give them a big applause. And thank you also for allowing me to go through my stream of consciousness. We will break for 1 hour, get back at, based on the agenda, 2:10. So please enjoy the lunch and come back re-energized, because we have a big panel, a big set of panels in the afternoon. Thank you very much.